She wasn't just a chief executive officer, she was running for her life. What would you do if the most powerful woman on the plane clutched your hand and whispered, "Don't turn around, they're watching us"? I boarded the plane with my 5-year-old daughter Lily, already exhausted from juggling her snacks, her backpack that was somehow heavier than mine, and her unstoppable excitement about flying. She treated airports like amusement parks, pointing at everything: luggage belts, window reflections, people in uniforms, as if it were all part of some magical show. I, on the other hand, was running purely on caffeine, hope, and the thin thread of patience that single parents learn to survive on. We finally found our seats wedged in the middle of the plane where the air always feels too warm and too recycled. I was just buckling Lily in when she tugged my sleeve with the seriousness only a child can have. "Daddy," she whispered, "the lady behind us is crying." Kids don't notice bills or deadlines, but they notice emotion like alarms. And something in her voice made me turn around. That was the first time I saw her. Ava Rowan. A name people usually said with awe, envy, or ambition. The youngest tech CEO in the country. A woman who built an empire from an idea she coded in her dorm room. Usually photographed in perfectly tailored suits, usually surrounded by board members and cameras, usually the kind of person the world pretended was made of steel. But not today. Today she looked like someone whose carefully constructed world had been kicked out from under her. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed with red, like she'd been silently fighting with herself for hours. Her hair, usually sleek in every photo, was tied back loosely, a few strands falling the way exhaustion makes things fall. She wasn't crying now, but she had been. Recently. Hard. She noticed me looking at her, and she straightened up instantly, wiping the last trace of vulnerability from her face with a tiny, sharp inhale. It was the kind of breath people take when they've been taught their whole life that breaking isn't allowed. When she stood to take her seat, fate or bad seat planning placed her right beside me. No entourage. No assistant. Just a woman alone with a phone clutched so tightly that her knuckles were white. She didn't look like she was worried about a meeting or a company crisis. She looked like she was afraid of the noise her own heartbeat made. The plane began to taxi and Lily leaned against me, already drifting into sleep. Ava tried to sit still, but every few moments her grip on her phone tightened. At one point she closed her eyes as if trying to hold herself together by force. And then, somewhere between takeoff and the clouds, her body finally gave out. Slowly, heavily, helplessly, her head leaned toward me, settling onto my shoulder. I froze. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because it felt like someone collapsing under a weight no one else could see. Her breathing evened, but not peacefully. More like someone who'd been running too long and finally stopped because they had no choice. In that moment she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a headline or a powerhouse or a billionaire. She was a human being, exhausted, frightened, and breaking quietly beside a stranger. I didn't know it then, but this single accidental moment would unravel everything she'd been hiding, and pull me and Lily directly into the center of it. She woke suddenly when the turbulence hit. One sharp jolt that made her gasp and sit upright so fast she nearly dropped her phone. For a moment she looked disoriented, dazed, like she'd forgotten where she was. Then her eyes widened with embarrassment and she began apologizing to me over and over, tripping over her own words. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I must have been more tired than I thought, I shouldn't have." She couldn't even finish a sentence, and the more she tried, the shakier she became. But it wasn't the embarrassment that caught my attention. It was her hands. They weren't the hands of a powerful CEO who negotiated million-dollar deals. They were trembling. Slightly but unmistakably. Her fingers kept tightening around her phone like she was grounding herself with sheer force. Her polished voice, calm, precise, professional, cracked around the edges, and for the first time I realized that whatever she was dealing with hadn't started on this plane. It had been following her long before she ever sat beside me. When the phone lit up in her lap, she froze. She didn't check it. She didn't even breathe. She just stared at the name on the screen as if touching it would set off an explosion. She swallowed hard, almost painfully, and finally whispered, "He found me." I didn't know who he was, but the fear in her voice was enough to make the air around us feel heavier. She kept her voice low as if someone else on the plane might be listening, and finally forced herself to speak. She told me her ex-business partner had accused her of leaking confidential data, something that could destroy her company and reputation instantly. She had built everything from scratch, entire years of work compressed into a few sleepless nights, And now it was all balancing on a knife's edge because of one man. But there was more. The board was already turning against her, she said. The moment there was even a whisper of scandal, people who once shook her hand and praised her vision suddenly saw an opportunity to replace her. Losing her company wasn't her only fear. She was afraid for her sister, 17, brilliant and painfully naive. He knows she's my weakness, Ava whispered, voice trembling. If he wants leverage, he'll go through her. He's done it before, to other people. She hadn't planned on taking this flight. She'd booked it under a different name at the last minute, trying to meet the only person who could help her prove her innocence. A cybersecurity specialist who had uncovered something important. Something she wouldn't tell me yet. All she said was, if he knows I'm coming, he'll do anything to stop me. Her eyes flickered across the cabin then, scanning faces, movements, postures. Not paranoid, calculated. Like a prey animal who had suddenly realized something else in the forest was hunting. And for the first time since I boarded that plane, I realized Ava Rowan wasn't afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of what powerful people do when they start losing control. Halfway through the flight, just when the cabin had settled into that strange mid-air quiet, the kind where people are half asleep and half bored, a flight attendant stopped beside us. She held a sealed envelope, the kind used for confidential documents or legal summons. Her expression was polite, but her eyes flicked between me, Lily, and Ava with subtle concern. "Ma'am," she said softly, "this was handed to us at the gate with instructions to deliver it to you, mid-flight." Mid-flight. Not before takeoff. Not after landing. Mid-flight. Someone wanted her trapped in the sky when she read whatever was inside. Ava stared at the envelope like she already knew it was bad news. Her hands, already unsteady, shook visibly as she took it. She opened the seal slowly, almost reluctantly, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Just one sentence. Printed, not handwritten. No signature. No logo. "Turn around. You won't make it to the meeting." The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she didn't blink. She just stared at the message, frozen in the seat, every trace of color gone. When she finally looked up, her voice came out as a whisper, thin, broken, terrified. "He knows I'm here," she said. "I'm not alone on this plane." I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not panic, but awareness. A shift. A realization that this wasn't just corporate sabotage. This was something else entirely. I scanned the cabin, doing my best not to look obvious. Most people were asleep or zoned out, headphones in, screens glowing. But then I saw him, 2 rows ahead on the left aisle. A man pretending to read a magazine but not actually turning pages. Every few seconds his eyes lifted just enough to check on Ava. Then I noticed the second man across the aisle. He looked half asleep, head tilted toward the window, but every time the first man glanced back he did too, like a silent signal was passing between them. Not random glances. Not coincidence. Pattern. Controlled. Trained. When I looked back at Ava, she was already gripping my hand, tightly enough that her fingers dug into my skin. There was no CEO armor left. No confident posture. No polished calm. Just fear. Raw human fear. "Don't move," she breathed. "Please don't move. Don't leave me. And keep Lily close." Her eyes flicked to my daughter, asleep with her tiny hand still wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. Something in Ava's expression shifted. Not just fear for herself, but fear that whatever danger had boarded with us might touch a child. For the first time she didn't look like a woman protecting a billion-dollar legacy. She looked like a woman trying to stay alive until the wheels hit the ground. And in that moment, high above the clouds with 2 strangers watching us like hawks, I understood exactly how much trouble she was in. As the captain announced the beginning of descent, the cabin shifted. The subtle change in pressure, people waking, seatbelts clicking, attendants making final rounds. But beside me, Ava wasn't preparing to land. She was bracing for something else entirely. She leaned in, close enough that I could feel the tremor in her breath. Her voice was barely a whisper. "When we land, walk off the plane with me. Please." At first I didn't understand. Then she explained, short, urgent sentences, every word wrapped in fear she was trying to hide. If she looked like she was alone, she said, those men would corner her the moment they had the chance. But a father with a small child, they wouldn't risk creating a scene. Not where cameras, witnesses, and airport security were everywhere. She was counting on the innocence of Lily's presence to shield her. I nodded before I even had time to second-guess it. As the wheels touched down, the energy in the plane changed. The two men stood up immediately, too fast, too alert. They pretended to stretch, to shift bags, to make room in the aisle. But their eyes tracked Ava with laser focus. One positioned himself ahead of us. The other angled himself behind, closing gaps, tightening space. Ava's composure cracked just slightly, her jaw tensed, shoulders rigid, but she stepped closer until her arm brushed mine. Then, without hesitation, she slid her hand into mine. Not gently. Not romantically. Desperately. Like someone clinging to the one thing keeping them afloat. To anyone watching, we looked like a small family traveling together. But to me, it felt like holding the hand of someone trying not to fall apart. Lily, half asleep, instinctively reached for Ava's free hand, and Ava squeezed back with a gentleness that contradicted the terror in her eyes. For a moment, she looked almost heartbroken. Like she wasn't just afraid, she was exhausted by the loneliness fear creates. We walked in a tight line down the aisle past the first man. He shifted as if preparing to intercept, then hesitated when he saw Lily. His jaw tightened, but he stepped back. The second man paused near the exit, eyes narrowing, calculating. But when he saw Ava's fingers intertwined with mine, and Lily between us, his expression changed. Frustrated. Foiled. He stepped aside with a stiffness that didn't feel like surrender, only delay. And then we were out. The moment we crossed through the jet bridge, the two men didn't follow. They didn't approach. They simply melted into the stream of passengers, swallowed by movement and noise like they had never existed. But the danger they carried lingered. Thick, invisible, suffocating. Ava stopped just outside the gate, her back pressed against the wall. She let out a breath so shaky it almost broke into a sob. Then strangely, it turned into a breathless, uneven laugh. A laugh of someone who'd been holding her fear inside so tightly that the release felt unreal. When she looked at me, it wasn't like I was a stranger. It was like I had unknowingly stepped into a role she desperately needed. Someone who didn't ask for explanations, didn't back away, didn't leave her to fight alone. "You have no idea what you just did," she whispered. And from the way she looked at Lily, and then at me, I knew she wasn't talking about just walking her off a plane. Outside the crowd, where the noise of rolling suitcases softened and the airport announcements faded into background static, Ava finally slowed down. She glanced over her shoulder twice. Quick, practiced, assessing. Then she reached into her bag with a steadiness that didn't match the frantic beat of her pulse visible at her neck. "A second," she said softly. "Not a request. A need." She pulled out a small matte black card and pressed it into my palm. At first I assumed it was her business card. A CEO's contact, maybe a thank you gesture. But when I flipped it over, my breath caught. There was no company logo. No name. Just a single embossed seal and a number printed in stark white. FBI, Cybercrime Division Direct Emergency Line. My hand stiffened around it. "Ava, why do you have this?" She swallowed, and the answer in her eyes landed heavy. "It's not mine. They gave it to me when my team detected the breach last month. They told me to call only if things escalated, if my life or someone else's was at risk." "Are things escalated?" I asked. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She simply breathed out a quiet, tired truth. "If I don't walk out of my meeting within 2 hours, call that number. Tell them my name. They'll know what to do." 2 hours. Suddenly, it felt like someone had tied a countdown clock around my chest. I looked at the card again, and the weight of it settled like lead. 30 minutes ago, I was just a father carrying his daughter's backpack and trying not to lose a toy unicorn in an airport security bin. Now I was holding a line directly to federal agents because I had become, by accident, by fate, by the quiet desperation of a stranger, part of a war I didn't understand. Ava tightened the strap of her bag on her shoulder. The fear was still there, buried under expensive perfume and seal-level poise, but now it was fused with resolve. A different kind of sharpness. She had decided to walk into danger with full awareness of what waited for her. "You helped me more than you know," she said, voice steady but soft. "I needed cover. I needed time. I needed someone who wouldn't ask questions I couldn't answer." I wanted to say something reassuring, something brave. But nothing felt big enough for the moment. So I simply nodded. She stepped back, giving me one final look, grateful, afraid, and somehow relieved all at once. Then she turned and walked into the terminal. Her stride was straight-backed, confident, almost regal. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she scanned every reflection in every glass barrier as she passed. She didn't look back. And as I stood there holding Lily's hand and the FBI card in the other, a chilling realization settled deep in my stomach. Slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. People don't just fall asleep on strangers. Not with that depth of exhaustion. Not with that level of unconscious trust. Something had been chasing her long before she boarded the plane. And now, whether I wanted it or not, it had my name, my face, and the fact that I had helped her.